and welcome back for another deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
So, have you ever stopped to think about the environmental cost of, like, your smartphone?
Or how much energy those massive data centers actually use.
Right. It's wild. We often think of the digital world as, like, clean, you know, immaterial.
But today we're going to unpack the surprising environmental impact of our increasingly digital lives.
Exactly. And to guide us through this super complex landscape, we're diving deep into the UN's Digital Economy Report 2024. This report has some pretty startling statistics. Did you know that demand for certain minerals, those used in our devices, could increase by 500% by 2050?
Yeah, that's a massive increase. And it's just the tip of the iceberg, really.
What else is in there?
Consider data centers. They're kind of the backbone of our digital world.
Right.
Their energy consumption is on track to double by 2026.
Seriously.
Yeah. If we don't find ways to make these centers more sustainable, the environmental consequences could be huge.
Okay, so let's unpack this.
That's good.
Starting with the, I guess, often overlooked resource hunger of the digital age. The report really hits on the fact that our digital world is anything but immaterial.
Right. The sheer volume of physical resources needed to support our digital lifestyles is honestly staggering.
Yeah.
We're talking about mining raw materials, manufacturing billions of devices, and powering this vast network of data centers that store and process all our information.
It really makes you think twice about buying the latest gadget, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Imagine the journey of a single smartphone. From the mines where those raw materials are extracted to the factory where it's assembled and shipped all over the world.
It's a long journey.
It is. And here's something I bet a lot of people don't know. Your smartphone, like that sleek little device we all have, it contains 63 elements from the periodic table.
It's true. Over half of all the known elements crammed into something that fits in your pocket.
63. And it's not like these materials magically appear.
True.
Mining them has real environmental and social impacts. Plus, that complexity is a big reason why recycling these devices is so challenging.
Exactly. It's not like just tossing a plastic bottle in the recycling bin.
Speaking of increasing complexity, the report highlights a fascinating trend. The number of elements used in phones has jumped from just 10 in 1960 to 63 in 2021.
Wow.
That's a huge jump.
It is.
It really shows how quickly our digital demands are evolving.
And with each new generation of devices, the environmental stakes just get higher.
It's like this never-ending cycle. Upgrade, consume, discard. But what really struck me in the report was the sheer scale of digital growth and how that translates into real environmental impact.
Yeah, the numbers are mind-boggling.
But-
Global data traffic quadrupled between 2018 and 2023.
Seriously, that's insane.
Think about what that means for energy consumption and all the resources needed to support that growth.
And then there's the Internet of Things, that explosion of connected devices, like smart refrigerators and fitness trackers. I read in the report that the number of these devices is predicted to more than double, from 16 billion in 2023 to a crazy 39 billion in 2029.
Yeah. And with all of these devices constantly transmitting data, the demand for energy and infrastructure is only going to intensify.
It's kind of scary to think about, right?
That's particularly striking is that sub-Saharan Africa is projected to see the highest growth in mobile data traffic in the coming years.
Does that mean they'll have the biggest impact?
Yeah, the environmental impact of digitalization will likely be felt most acutely in regions that are already facing significant challenges.
It's a reminder that the digital divide isn't just about access to technology. It's also about who bears the brunt of the environmental consequences. And you know what else shocked me? The report's projection that the ICT sector's emissions could account for 1.5 to 3.2% of global greenhouse gas emissions.
That's a huge chunk.
It is, right?
It underscores the need for the industry to prioritize sustainability and fast.
Absolutely. But let's go back to those data centers.
Okay.
I think people don't realize how resource-intensive these hubs of our digital world are.
Yeah. It's easy to forget that all of our data, those emails, photos, streaming videos, it all has to physically live somewhere. And that somewhere is a vast network of data centers that require enormous amounts of energy to operate.
And it's not just about energy, right?
You're right. They also consume vast amounts of water, mainly for cooling.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it can put a significant strain on local resources, especially in areas already struggling with water scarcity.
The report states that data centers use an estimated 460 terawatt hours of electricity in 2022. And it gets worse. That number is predicted to double by 2026.
It's crazy. That's more electricity than entire countries consume.
It's a staggering statistic, and it raises an important question about where we're building these data centers. Are we strategically locating them in regions with abundant renewable energy and water resources?
Yeah, and are we considering the potential impact on local communities and ecosystems?
Those are important questions, especially as the demand for data storage and processing keeps growing. But let's switch gears and talk about something we all do: online shopping. On the surface, e-commerce seems like an eco-friendly alternative to, physical stores. Less driving, less infrastructure.
Right. It does seem that way.
But is it really that simple?
It's more complicated than it looks. E-commerce presents its own set of environmental challenges.
Like what?
Well, instead of driving to a store, you're relying on a fleet of delivery trucks, often making individual deliveries to homes, which can lead to more transportation emissions overall.
So even though I'm not driving, the environmental cost of transporting all those goods is still there.
Exactly.
It's just shifted to the delivery network.
Right. And then there's packaging waste.
Oh, yeah, all those boxes and plastic wrapping.
Plus, let's be honest, online shopping often leads to impulse buys. We buy things we don't really need.
Yeah, those late-night online shopping sprees are dangerous.
Exactly. And this brings us to the concept of rebound effects.
Right.
Sometimes efficiencies in one area, like reduced travel to stores, can actually lead to increased consumption overall.
So instead of driving less and consuming less, I end up buying more stuff online because it's so easy.
That's the risk.
It's definitely something to think about. We need to be mindful of our consumption habits no matter how we're shopping.
Absolutely.
It's a good reminder that there's often more to the story than meets the eye.
That's true.
But let's not get too down on ourselves. The UN report offers solutions too. It outlines how to create a more sustainable digital future.
Absolutely. And one of the key ideas the report highlights is the concept of a circular economy, specifically applied to the digital world.
Can you explain what a circular economy is in this context?
Imagine a system where electronic devices are designed to last longer, be easily repaired, and eventually be disassembled and recycled so we can recover most, if not all, of the materials used to make them.
That sounds ideal. So it's about moving away from the take, make, dispose model.
Exactly. It's about closing the loop, creating a more sustainable cycle where resources are valued and reused.
Okay, but how do we actually get there? What needs to change?
Well, it's going to require a multifaceted approach. Governments, manufacturers, and consumers all need to be involved.
All right, let's unpack that a bit. What role do governments play in promoting a circular economy for electronics?
Governments can enact legislation that encourages sustainable design. They can promote extended producer responsibility and incentivize proper e-waste management.
Extended producer responsibility, you mean making manufacturers responsible for the entire life cycle of their products?
Exactly, from design to disposal.
Shifting the burden of responsibility from consumers and taxpayers to the companies that are actually making money off these devices.
Right. It's about encouraging those companies to design products that are more durable and easier to recycle.
Okay, that makes sense. So what about manufacturers? What can they do?
Manufacturers need to embrace circular design. This means designing devices for durability, repairability, and ease of disassembly for recycling.
I've heard about the right to repair movement,
Yeah.
which advocates for consumers to be able to fix their own devices.
Exactly.
Is that part of the solution?
Absolutely. Giving consumers the right to repair their own devices empowers them and makes it easier to extend the lifespan of those devices.
And speaking of consumers, what can we do to support this shift towards a circular economy?
Well, choose durable and repairable devices. Hold on to them longer and recycle them responsibly when you're done with them.
Simple but important.
It is.
It's a reminder that our choices as consumers have real power.
Definitely.
We can vote with our wallets
Absolutely.
and support companies that align with our values. But it can be overwhelming to know where to start. Are there any resources or organizations that can help people make more sustainable digital choices?
There are. The report highlights several initiatives and organizations dedicated to promoting sustainable digital practices. We'll definitely include links to those resources in the show notes so you can check them out.
That's great. Before we move on, I just want to emphasize that even small changes can make a big difference.
I agree.
Every time you repair a device instead of replacing it or recycle an old phone, you're contributing to a more sustainable future.
It all adds up. As we become more aware of the hidden costs of digitalization, we can start to make more informed and responsible choices. But let's not forget that the end-of-life phase of digital devices is just one piece of the puzzle. There's a whole other dimension to this issue that often gets overlooked.
E-waste, right.
You got it. That mountain of discarded phones, laptops, and gadgets that keeps growing every year.
Yeah. And according to the UN report, this is a global problem that's only getting worse.
It is.
Okay, so let's dive into that. What exactly happens to our electronics when we're done with them?
Ideally, they would be recycled. Allow us to recover valuable materials and reduce the need to mine for new resources. But the reality is a bit more complicated.
Yeah, I've heard stories about e-waste being shipped to developing countries, where it ends up in landfills, posing serious health and environmental risks.
That's a major concern that the report highlights. The informal handling of e-waste can expose workers to toxic materials, contaminate soil and water, and contribute to air pollution.
It's heartbreaking to think about the people and communities impacted by this irresponsible disposal of e-waste. What can be done to address this?
Well, as we said earlier, the report strongly advocates for that shift from a linear to a circular economy model. But let's explore what that actually looks like in practice.
All right, give me some concrete examples. How do we go beyond just talking about a circular economy and actually make it a reality?
Okay, imagine a system where electronic devices are designed to be durable and easily repaired. Imagine a world where, instead of throwing away a broken phone, you can easily access replacement parts and fix it yourself, making it last much longer. And when a device does reach the end of its life, it can be easily disassembled, allowing valuable materials to be recovered and reused.
That's a great image. So it's about closing the loop.
Exactly. Moving away from that take, make, dispose model that has been the norm for so long.
Okay, I'm with you, but how do we get there? What needs to change?
It's going to require a collaborative effort. Governments, manufacturers, and consumers all need to play a role.
Okay, let's break down each of those roles.
Sounds good.
Starting with governments, what specific actions can they take to promote a circular economy for electronics?
They can enact legislation that encourages sustainable design. They can promote extended producer responsibility and incentivize proper e-waste management.
Okay, so addressing the issue at the design stage.
Exactly. Ensuring that products are built to last and be recycled responsibly.
What about extended producer responsibility? Remind us how that fits into the e-waste picture.
Extended producer responsibility means making manufacturers accountable for the entire life cycle of their products. Governments can enact laws that require companies to take back their products when they're no longer useful, or to contribute financially to e-waste recycling programs.
That makes sense. So instead of just making money off selling a device, the manufacturers would also have to deal with making sure it doesn't end up as pollution.
Right. It's about making those companies think about designing products that are more durable and easier to recycle from the very beginning.
That makes sense. But it's not just about regulations, right?
Yeah.
We need to make it easier for people to recycle their old electronics properly.
Definitely.
How do we do that?
Governments can invest in infrastructure to support responsible e-waste recycling. Think like collection points and certified recycling facilities. They can also launch public awareness campaigns.
To teach people about recycling.
Yeah, to educate consumers about the importance of e-waste recycling and how to do it properly.
So it's a mix of policy, infrastructure, and education.
You got it.
But let's switch gears now and talk about manufacturers. What can companies, especially those in the IC2 sector, do to embrace a circular economy approach to their products?
They have a huge responsibility to design products with the environment in mind.
Like we were just talking about.
Right. And that includes thinking about the end-of-life phase.
We talked about design for durability and repairability, but can you give some specific examples of how companies can design electronics so they're easier to recycle?
One key area is modular design.
Like building blocks.
Yeah, where devices are built with parts that can be easily replaced. Imagine being able to swap out a faulty battery or screen instead of throwing away the entire device.
That would be great.
It would make repairing devices much easier.
And less wasteful. What else can manufacturers do to make their products more recyclable?
Using recycled materials. A lot of electronic devices contain valuable metals and other materials that can be recovered and reused. Manufacturers can reduce their reliance on virgin materials by incorporating recycled content into their products.
That makes sense. Less mining, less waste, and more sustainable products. Are there any other design things to think about?
Yes, we have to reduce the use of hazardous substances. A lot of electronic devices contain toxic materials that can be risky for human health and the environment during the recycling process.
So using less toxic stuff would make devices safer to use and easier to recycle.
Exactly.
It's clear that manufacturers have a big role to play in creating a more sustainable future for electronics.
Definitely.
But ultimately, it's us consumers who are making the purchasing decisions.
That's true.
So let's talk about what we can do as individuals to make a difference.
Consumers have a lot more power than they realize. Our choices have real consequences. By making informed decisions about the products we buy and how we dispose of them, we can send a powerful message to manufacturers, encourage them to embrace more sustainable practices.
So what are some specific things that we can do?
First, be more mindful of our consumption habits.
Do we really need the latest and greatest all the time?
Right. Do we need the latest gadget, or can we hold on to our existing devices for a little longer?
Yeah, we're all guilty of that sometimes.
It's easy to fall into that trap.
We need to be more conscious of the environmental impact of, I guess, our tech addiction.
Exactly. And when we do need to buy new electronics, we can choose products that are designed to last. Choose things that are easy to repair.
We can support companies that are committed to sustainability.
Absolutely.
What else can we do?
When our devices reach the end of their life, recycle them responsibly.
Don't just throw them away, right?
Right. Don't just toss those old phones and laptops in the trash.
Yeah.
Find a reputable e-waste recycler in your area. Check with the manufacturer to see if they have a take-back program.
Yeah, a lot of companies do that now.
They do.
It might take a little extra effort, but it's worth it to know that those valuable materials are being recovered.
And that you're not contributing to the e-waste problem.
And I think it's worth saying that even small changes can make a big difference.
Definitely.
Every time you choose to repair a device instead of replacing it, or you buy a refurbished device instead of a brand new one, you're contributing to a more circular economy.
It's about changing our mindset, moving away from a culture of disposability.
Embracing a more sustainable approach.
Right. And those individual choices, when a lot of people make them, can have a big impact.
It's about collective action, recognizing that we all have a role to play in creating a more sustainable future.
I agree. But let's move beyond the physical devices. Let's talk about the infrastructure that supports our digital lives. Let's talk about those data centers.
You mean like the silent giants of the digital age?
Exactly.
We talked about data centers a little bit before, but it's worth going deeper into the environmental challenges and opportunities they present. Where does all our data actually live?
It's easy to forget that all of our digital information, emails, photos, streaming videos, all of it has to physically live somewhere.
And that's where the data centers come in.
That's right. And as our reliance on digital technologies continues to grow, so does the demand for data storage and processing power. This means more data centers, which means they're using more energy and resources.
And they already use a crazy amount of energy. The report estimates that data centers worldwide used 460 terawatt hours of electricity in 2022, and that number is expected to double by 2026.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling when you think about the scale of energy use involved. But energy consumption is just one part of it. These facilities also require a lot of water for cooling.
We talked about that earlier.
We did.
But remind me again, why do data centers need so much water for cooling?
Servers generate a lot of heat, and traditional data centers rely on water-intensive cooling systems to prevent those servers from overheating.
Ah, okay.
Which of course can put a big strain on local water resources, especially in regions that are already struggling with water scarcity.
It's a good reminder that our digital habits have real-world consequences, even when those consequences are hidden from view. So what can be done to make data centers more sustainable?
Well, there's a growing movement to make data centers more environmentally friendly. This includes everything from improving energy efficiency to exploring innovative cooling technologies that reduce water consumption.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these sustainable data center solutions. What are some specific things data centers can do to reduce their environmental impact?
One key area is energy efficiency. Data centers are constantly looking for ways to reduce their energy consumption. This includes investing in more efficient servers and cooling systems, optimizing server utilization to reduce idle time, and even exploring innovative approaches like using waste heat to generate electricity.
I've heard about data centers using renewable energy sources, like solar and wind power. Is that part of the solution?
Definitely. Switching to renewable energy sources is essential for reducing the carbon footprint of data centers. Some companies are even building data centers in locations with abundant renewable energy resources, like Iceland, where geothermal energy is plentiful.
That's so cool. It sounds like there are a lot of creative solutions out there.
There are.
But isn't there a risk that data centers could end up competing with other sectors for those renewable energy resources?
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
The transition to renewable energy needs to be carefully managed to make sure there's enough capacity to meet the needs of all sectors. But data centers can also play a role in accelerating the adoption of renewable energy by investing in new projects and creating demand for clean energy solutions.
So it's not just about reducing the environmental impact of data centers themselves. It's about helping the world transition to a more sustainable energy system.
Exactly.
What about water consumption? What can be done to reduce the amount of water that data centers use?
There are some water-saving technologies that data centers can implement. One promising approach is using air cooling instead of water cooling. Air cooling systems are becoming increasingly sophisticated,
Oh, cool.
and they can be just as effective as water-based systems in certain climates.
So it's about finding alternatives to those water-intensive cooling methods.
Right. Another approach is to use recycled water for cooling. This could involve using treated wastewater or collecting rainwater for non-potable uses.
Are those things being done now?
Yeah, some companies are even exploring more innovative approaches like using seawater for cooling.
That's wild.
It is.
Seems like there are a lot of solutions out there.
There are. But it's important to remember that no single solution is a silver bullet.
Right, we need to use all of them.
Exactly. We need a multi-pronged approach, and we need to work together to implement these solutions effectively.
Okay, so we've covered a lot in this deep dive so far. We've explored the hidden costs of digitalization, from mining to disposal. We've talked about the importance of moving towards a circular economy model for electronics and what governments, manufacturers, and consumers can do to make that happen. And we've gotten into the complicated world of data centers and the challenges and opportunities they present.
It's been a comprehensive exploration, but as you said, we've only just scratched the surface.
There's still so much more to explore.
Definitely. But before we move on, I think it's important to emphasize one key point. While these challenges are significant, they're not impossible to overcome. There are solutions. And by working together, we can create a more sustainable digital future.
Couldn't agree more. So for everyone listening, stay tuned because we're just getting started. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore the often overlooked issue of e-waste and how we can create a more circular digital economy.
And we'll discuss what this all means for you right here in your own community.
Stay with us. Welcome back. We just finished talking about some of the hidden costs of our digital lives, from the resource-intensive process of manufacturing our devices to those energy-guzzling data centers that store all our information.
Yeah, our digital habits really do have real-world environmental consequences.
But now, let's shift gears and delve into potential solutions, starting with the often overlooked issue of e-waste.
It's interesting how we always focus on the beginning and the middle of a product's life cycle, but forget about the end.
Don't we?
When we're talking about electronics, that end stage, that e-waste phase, is a critical piece of the sustainability puzzle.
It's easy to just throw an old phone or laptop in the trash and forget about it, but what happens to all those devices?
Right.
What are the consequences of not dealing with e-waste responsibly?
That's the question more people should be asking.
Yeah.
Ideally, electronic waste would be recycled so we could get back all those valuable materials.
Yeah.
Reduce the need to mine for new resources. But unfortunately, it's a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah, I've heard some pretty scary stories about, like, mountains of e-waste being shipped to developing countries where it ends up in landfills, which obviously poses serious health risks to local communities and contaminates the environment.
Sadly, those stories are all too true. The UN report really emphasizes the global e-waste challenge. It shows how mishandling this waste can lead to pretty awful consequences. Workers in those informal recycling operations are often exposed to toxic materials, and the improper disposal of e-waste can contaminate the soil and water.
And, pollute ecosystems and impact whole communities.
It's a classic example of environmental injustice.
It is.
The burden of our consumption habits falls on those least equipped to handle the consequences.
So how do we tackle this problem? What can we do to make sure that e-waste is handled responsibly?
The UN report suggests shifting from a linear to a circular economy model for electronics. Imagine a world where electronic devices are designed to last longer,
Okay, yeah.
easy to repair, and can be taken apart and recycled so that we can recover most of the materials used to make them.
We've mentioned the circular economy idea a couple of times,
We have.
but it's worth talking about it again, especially when we're talking about e-waste.
It is.
It seems like a huge change, moving away from that take, make, dispose model that's so common.
Yeah, it's about transforming how we see electronics,
Right.
recognizing they're not disposable, but valuable resources that should be kept in use for as long as possible.
Okay, I get the vision, but how do we actually make this circular economy happen? What needs to change?
It's going to take a multi-pronged approach involving governments, manufacturers, and consumers.
All right, let's break that down. Let's start with governments. What can they do to incentivize this shift toward a circular economy for electronics?
Governments can play a big role by enacting legislation that encourages sustainable design and promotes extended producer responsibility.
So it's not just about cleaning up the mess afterwards, it's about addressing the issue at the design stage, making sure products are built to last.
And be recycled responsibly.
Exactly.
Governments can set standards for product durability and repairability, and they can even offer tax breaks or subsidies to companies that follow these circular design principles.
And extended producer responsibility. We talked about that before, but can you remind us how that fits into the e-waste picture?
Of course, extended producer responsibility means making manufacturers accountable for the entire life cycle of their products.
From start to finish.
Right. From design to disposal. Governments can pass laws that require companies to take back their products when they reach the end of their life, or contribute financially to e-waste recycling programs.
That seems fair.
It is.
So instead of just profiting from the sale of a device, manufacturers would also be responsible for making sure it doesn't end up polluting the environment.
Exactly. It's about making those companies think about the environmental costs of their products.
And designing products that are more durable and easier to recycle.
Right. Right from the start.
That makes sense. But it can't just be about regulations, right? We need to make it easier for people to recycle their old electronics the right way.
You're absolutely right.
How can we do that?
Governments can invest in infrastructure that makes responsible e-waste recycling easier. Things like collection points and certified recycling facilities. They can also launch those public awareness campaigns we talked about.
Right, to teach people about the importance of e-waste recycling.
Yeah, and how to do it properly.
So it's about policy, infrastructure, and education.
Exactly. It all works together.
But now let's talk about manufacturers. What can companies do to embrace this circular economy approach?
Manufacturers have a responsibility to design products with the environment in mind, which includes thinking about what happens to the product at the end of its life.
Right.
We already discussed designing for durability and repairability, but let's get into specifics. How can companies design electronics with recycling in mind?
Okay, yeah.
One important area is modular design, where devices are built with components that can be easily replaced. Like, imagine if you could just swap out a bad battery or screen instead of throwing away the whole device.
That would be awesome. It would make repairing devices so much easier
It would.
and less wasteful.
Exactly.
What else can manufacturers do to make their products more recyclable?
Another step is using recycled materials. Lots of electronic devices contain valuable metals and other materials that can be recovered and reused.
Right.
So manufacturers can reduce their dependence on virgin materials by incorporating recycled content into their products, which closes the loop and reduces demand for those new resources.
Less mining, less waste, and more sustainable products. What else should they be thinking about when designing products?
They need to think about using less hazardous substances. A lot of electronic devices have toxic materials in them that can be dangerous for people and the environment when they're being recycled.
That makes sense.
By designing products without those harmful substances, they're making them safer to use and easier to recycle responsibly.
It sounds like manufacturers have a really big job to do in creating a more sustainable future for electronics.
They do. But it's important to remember that, in the end, it's us consumers who are deciding what to buy.
Yeah, we are.
So let's talk about what we can do individually to make a difference.
Right. What can we do? Consumers have a lot more power than they realize. Our choices really do make a difference. By making smart choices about the products we buy and how we get rid of them, we can send a message to those manufacturers, encourage them to be more sustainable.
Absolutely. So what are some concrete actions that consumers can take?
I'm ready to hear them.
Well, one of the simplest yet most impactful things is just consuming less. Do we really need to buy the latest smartphone every year? Or can we use our current devices for a bit longer?
Yeah, we're all guilty of getting caught up in that upgrade cycle.
We are.
But you're right, we need to ask ourselves if we really need that new gadget.
Exactly. And if we do need to buy new electronics, we can choose products that will last longer.
Right. Find things that are easy to fix.
Look for products with a long warranty and make sure that it's easy to get replacement parts.
We can also support companies that are working on sustainability, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Align your purchasing decisions with your values.
What else?
When our devices eventually do reach the end of their life, it's important to recycle them the right way.
No more throwing them in the trash.
Right. Find a reputable e-waste recycler. Or check to see if the manufacturer has a take-back program.
A lot of companies are doing that now.
They are.
It might take a bit more effort, but it's worth knowing those valuable materials are being recovered.
And that you're not contributing to the e-waste problem.
And I just want to say again, even small changes can make a big difference.
Right.
Every time you repair something instead of replacing it, or you buy a refurbished device instead of a brand new one, you're helping to build that circular economy.
It's about moving away from that throwaway culture.
Embracing a more sustainable mindset.
Exactly. And all those individual choices, when enough people make them, add up to real change.
It's about collective action.
It is.
Realizing that we all have a role to play in creating a more sustainable future.
I agree. But let's move beyond the physical devices now.
Okay.
Let's talk about the infrastructure behind our digital lives. Let's talk about data centers.
Those mysterious data centers. The silent giants of the digital age.
That's a good way to put it.
We touched on data centers before, but let's go a bit deeper. What are some of the environmental challenges and opportunities they present?
Where does all our data actually live? What are the consequences of storing and processing all that information?
Those are big questions.
It's easy to forget that all of our digital stuff, emails, photos, videos, social media, all of it has to physically live somewhere.
And that's where those data centers come in.
Right. And as we rely more and more on technology, the need for data storage and processing power grows, which means more data centers using more energy and resources.
We already talked about how much energy data centers use. The UN report estimates they consumed 460 terawatt hours of electricity in 2022, and that's expected to double in just a couple of years.
Yeah, by 2026. It's pretty incredible when you consider the scale of energy use, but of course, energy consumption is only part of it. These facilities also need a ton of water for cooling.
Right, we talked about that. Why do data centers need so much water to keep cool?
Servers generate a lot of heat, and those traditional data centers depend on water-intensive cooling systems.
To keep everything from overheating.
Right. And that can be a problem for local water resources, especially in areas that are already dry.
It shows that our digital habits really do have real-world impacts, even if we don't see them directly.
Definitely.
So what can be done to make data centers more sustainable?
There's a lot of work being done to make data centers more environmentally friendly.
That's good to hear.
This includes everything from improving energy efficiency to exploring new cooling technologies that use less water.
Tell me more about these sustainable data center solutions. What are some things data centers can do to reduce their environmental footprint?
One key area is energy efficiency. They're always looking for ways to use less energy. This includes using more efficient servers and cooling systems, making sure servers aren't just sitting idle and using energy when they don't need to, and even looking at things like using waste heat to make electricity.
I've heard about data centers using renewable energy sources like solar and wind power.
Right.
Is that part of the solution too?
Absolutely. Switching to renewable energy is super important for reducing the carbon footprint of data centers. Some companies are even building data centers in places where there's already a lot of renewable energy.
Like where?
Like Iceland, where there's a ton of geothermal energy.
That's amazing. It sounds like there's a lot of innovation happening in this area.
There is.
But, isn't there a risk that data centers could end up competing with other sectors for those renewable energy resources?
Yeah, that's a valid point. The shift to renewable energy needs to be done carefully so that there's enough for everyone. But data centers can also help speed up the use of renewable energy.
How so?
By investing in new projects and increasing demand for clean energy solutions.
So it's not just about making the data centers themselves more sustainable, it's about helping the whole world transition to a more sustainable energy system.
Exactly.
What about the water issue? What can be done to reduce the amount of water that data centers use?
There are some water-saving technologies that they can use. One is using air cooling instead of water cooling.
Oh, interesting.
Air cooling systems are getting much more sophisticated.
Cool.
And they can be just as effective as water-based systems in some places.
So it's about finding different ways to cool things down.
Another option is using recycled water.
Like wastewater.
Yeah, treated wastewater. Or collecting rainwater for things that don't need drinking water.
Those are good ideas.
Some companies are even experimenting with using seawater for cooling.
Wow, that's crazy. It sounds like there are solutions for both the energy and the water issues.
There are, but just like we talked about before, no single solution is perfect.
It's going to take a lot of different approaches.
Right. We need a combination of solutions, and we need to work together to put them into practice.
Okay, we've talked about a lot in this deep dive. We've looked at the environmental costs of our digital lives, from how they're made to how they're disposed of. We've discussed the importance of moving towards a circular economy model for electronics and how governments, manufacturers, and consumers can work together to make that happen. And we've dug into the world of data centers and the challenges and opportunities they face.
It's been a comprehensive exploration, but as you said, we've only just scratched the surface.
That's true. There's still a lot more to explore.
But before we move on, I want to emphasize one key point. These challenges are big, but they're not impossible to solve. There are solutions, and we can create a more sustainable digital future by working together.
I totally agree. So for everyone listening, stay tuned because we're not done yet. In the next part of our deep dive, we're going to get into the often overlooked issue of e-waste. We'll talk about how to create a more circular digital economy.
And we'll bring it home. What does this all mean for you right here in your community?
Stay with us. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We've been exploring the hidden environmental costs of digitalization. We talked about the long journey our devices take, from the mines where they're made to, sadly, often ending up in landfills. We've talked about data centers and their energy consumption and the whole challenge of e-waste. But now let's focus on solutions. What can we do together and individually to make our digital lives more sustainable?
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of the problem, but there's hope. The UN report doesn't just point out problems. It offers a vision for a more sustainable future and gives concrete steps we can take to get there.
I like concrete steps. So let's dive in. What kind of big changes are needed, like at the government level, to really address this?
One of the biggest things governments can do is promote a circular economy.
Right.
This means policies that encourage sustainable design, extending producer responsibility, and making sure e-waste is handled properly.
We've talked about extended producer responsibility a lot, but it's so important.
It is.
It makes the manufacturers responsible for the entire life of a product. So from design to disposal, it's on them.
Exactly. It's about making sure manufacturers are thinking about the environmental impact of their products and encouraging them to make products that last longer, are easier to fix, and are easier to recycle.
Makes sense. But it's not just about the manufacturers, right? Consumers need to be part of this circular economy too.
Absolutely.
What could encourage people to make more sustainable choices?
Governments could offer incentives like tax breaks for people who buy refurbished electronics. Or they could have deposit return systems where you get money back for recycling your old devices.
Like we do with bottles and cans.
Exactly. They could also do more public awareness campaigns to educate people about how a circular economy works and why it's important.
So it's about education.
It is.
What about that issue of e-waste being shipped overseas? How can we stop that?
We need to strengthen international agreements that regulate how hazardous waste is moved around. Things like the Basel Convention.
Okay, yeah.
We need stricter rules and better ways to enforce them to prevent the illegal dumping of e-waste in countries that don't have the resources to deal with it safely.
But it's not enough to just stop the dumping, right? We need to help those countries develop their own ways to manage e-waste.
Exactly. Things like technology transfer, financial assistance, and training programs are crucial.
So those countries can manage their e-waste safely and sustainably.
That's the goal.
Okay, so we've talked about governments. Let's talk about businesses. What can they do to make the digital economy more sustainable?
Businesses need to adopt more sustainable practices all around.
That sounds like a big task.
It is.
Give me an example.
It means reducing their energy consumption and their carbon footprint, designing products that last longer and are easier to repair, and taking responsibility for what happens to their products at the end of their life.
We've been talking about sustainable design a lot. Can you give me some more concrete examples of what that looks like?
Think about modular designs, where devices are built with parts that can be easily replaced. So if one part breaks, you don't have to throw the whole thing away.
Yeah, we talked about that with smartphones.
Right. If a battery or a screen goes bad, you can just swap it out. This reduces e-waste and makes devices last much longer.
It gives people more control over their technology, too.
It does.
I like that. What else can companies do to make their products more sustainable?
They can use more recycled materials. Lots of electronics have valuable materials that can be recovered and reused.
Right, like those 63 elements in a phone.
Exactly. By incorporating those recycled materials into their new products, companies can reduce their reliance on mining new materials, which helps the environment.
Less mining is good for everyone. Are there any other design things companies should be thinking about?
Reducing the use of toxic substances is crucial.
Right.
A lot of electronics have materials that are dangerous to human health and the environment. By designing products without those harmful substances, companies make their products safer and easier to recycle responsibly.
It shows they're really committed to protecting people and the planet.
It does.
It's clear that companies have a lot of power to lead the way toward a more sustainable digital economy. But at the end of the day, we, the consumers, are the ones buying these products. So let's talk about what we can do as individuals.
One of the biggest impacts we can have is just buying less stuff.
Oh, that's hard.
It can be, but ask yourself, do I really need to upgrade to the latest phone? Can you hold on to what you have for a little while longer?
It's so easy to get caught up in always wanting the newest thing.
It is.
But we have to be more thoughtful about how much we buy and think about the impact it has.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you do need to buy something, look for products that are made to last. Look for longer warranties and products that are easy to fix.
And we can support the companies that are doing the right thing.
Definitely. Vote with your wallet.
Show those companies that you care about sustainability.
And when your device finally does die, make sure to recycle it properly.
Right.
Don't just throw it away. Find a good e-waste recycler in your area.
Yeah.
Or check if the manufacturer has a take-back program.
That's a good point. I bet a lot of companies do that now.
They do.
It might be a little more work to recycle properly, but it's worth it.
You're keeping those materials out of landfills.
And not contributing to the e-waste problem.
Right.
I want to emphasize again, even small changes in our habits can have a big effect.
I agree.
Every time you choose to fix something instead of throwing it away, every time you choose a refurbished device over a brand new one, every time you turn off your electronics when you're not using them, you're helping create a more sustainable digital world.
It's all about changing our mindset.
It's about being mindful of our impact.
Right. And all those individual choices, when we all make them, can really make a difference.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together.
We are.
We can create a better future for ourselves and the planet.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive. We've covered a lot today.
We have.
We've explored the connection between our digital lives and the environment. We talked about the challenges of e-waste, data centers, and sustainable design. And we've emphasized the power of taking action, both individually and collectively.
We've just scratched the surface of this incredibly important topic, but hopefully this deep dive has inspired you to learn more and do something. Remember, we all have a role to play in shaping the future of digitalization.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It was great being here. Make sure you check out the show notes for links to resources and organizations we mentioned today.
It's a great place to learn more.
Until next time, stay curious.